What I'm presenting today to you is basically the beginning of a journey. That's a beginning of an ERC project, which focuses on conspiracy theories, on the mediatization, on the appropriation, and the formation of conspiracy theories in South Asia. But what I want to do with you here today, because you also have this interest in global dynamics, I want to reflect a little bit on what it means to speak about a conspiracy theory in the global world, right? And what I'm going to do thus is I'm going to do two forms of criticisms, I hope, and then a little addition to the field, right? So, and then I want to look together with you into the future, how this field of global conspiracy theories could look like. Right. Since this is anthropology, I am, and I have to start with an anecdote, of course, from my field. So whom you don't see here, that's Ephraim, who is a Christian pastor from Pakistan, who around 15 years ago heard a voice in his head which told him that Jesus is fake. I had no idea whose divine voice this was, but what the voice did, the voice guided him through YouTube and suggested ever more new videos. YouTube, a platform, we have to say, that just recently then became available in Pakistan in those days. Now, Ephraim wanted to study Hebrew in the beginning to understand the beginning, the difference between the New and the Old Testament, but the voice suggested ever more clips and suggested to watch ever more clips until he found the videos of Tovia Singer, whom we have here, a religious Zionist preacher, whose sermons or whose talks, so to say, then finally convinced him that Christianity, its birth religion, is just an invention by the Romans. Now, only later, Ephraim realized that the voice that talked to him was Hashem, the God of Israel, who suggested all of these YouTube videos, right? Thus guiding him away from his birth religion of Christianity to its true faith of Judaism. Now, learning through all of the rabbis on YouTube, as he said, Ephraim understood that he and his ancestors belonged to one of the 12 tribes of Israel, some of whom had fled this part of the world 2,700 years ago and then had settled in South Asia. Now, today, Ephraim is the leader of a group called the Bene Ephraim, a so-called self-identified or emerging Jewish community in Pakistan, a country where almost all Jewish communities have left by the year 2006. So the community is 300 members strong and is a part of a global movement that we could call, with the words of Ari Greenspan, something like YouTube Judaism, right? So I don't really have time to go into this very interesting relationship of divine voices and the algorithms, of capitalist platforms. But what I want to talk about is their politics of visibility, right? So how do the Bene Ephraim do this? Now, on the one hand, they try to grow, of course, and reach out to other Christians in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan to convince them that they too might be a part of one of these lost tribes of the tribe of Ephraim. But on the other hand, Bene Ephraim need to remain invisible in Pakistan, which has, due to myriad reasons, produced an atmosphere where anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and the critique of the state of Israel and its occupational politics very often intermix. Now, Ephraim and, importantly, his daughters, who understand some English, lead this group today, which is scattered all over the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. And through their YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook research, they have convinced an ever-growing community that the end of the world is actually near and that Hashem is now calling all the Jewish tribes back to Israel, right? And to introduce the community in their own words, let me show you a small clip from my 2023 film, Leshana Haba, that you have a little bit of a better impression of whom we are speaking about. All right. So what is this community then actually to do with the topic of conspiracy theories? Now, Ephraim and his daughters do not hesitate to perpetuate tropes from the fraudulent and anti-Semitic text called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is widely available in Pakistan and claims that there's a Jewish Masonic plot which secretly guides the fate of the world. Now, it is within their outreach efforts among a community of already very disempowered Christians in Pakistan that Ephraim inverts these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories into the idea of Jewish power and influence. Now, to emphasize this point, which is going to become important for later, the protocols are not necessarily stigmatized knowledge, to speak with Barkun, right? To show this, just last November, Pakistan passed a law that criminalizes the use of symbols and the preaching of Zionism, the Illuminati, and Freemasonry, right? So these things are associated within one equivalential chain. And it is only within this very highly charged environment, which is saturated with effective investment into anything Jewish, into every form of potential Jewish plot, in Jewish plot narratives, that made this community possible in the absence of any kind of traditional Jewish guidance in Pakistan. And the Bnei Ephraim utilize here what a scholar of conspiracy theories, Mark Fenster, calls popular eschatologies, which are a mix of conspiracy theories, of eschatological narratives, and of visions of the judgment day. And these visions then produce lines of solidarity and images of a common future to convince also other Christians in Pakistan that they too might be a part of the lost Jewish tribe. Now, through my ethnography and taking this ethnography as an empirical case study, or as a model case, as I will call it, I will argue that conspiracy theories, when understood as communicative practices, rather than truth claims to be evaluated, they function as what we could imagine as plugins. These are narrative structures whose latent affordances become actualized when they encounter the right host environment, in the case at hand constituting a community and the collective identity and the potential future. What I need to do at this point, however, is I need to put a pin into this story, and we come back to this towards the end. And I think I need to speak about what I actually mean when I speak about conspiracy theories. Now, for the purpose of this project and of this talk, I define a conspiracy theory as the belief that certain historical events, but also maybe history as a whole, results from a secret and potentially sinister plot, often orchestrated by a small group of people, rather than being established by mainstream explanations, right? And this is, I think, already the problem that we see here if we want to look at conspiracy theories from a more global lens, that the understanding of what is a mainstream changes according to geographical location and time, right? Conspiracy theories are, maybe with Foucault, the fringes of regimes of truth, and they change in time and in place. Nevertheless, many scholars of conspiracy theories would claim that conspiracy theories are everywhere, such as the political scientist Joseph Oshinsky writes. Social psychologist Jan William van Prooijen would echo this perspective when he describes conspiracy theories as widespread and culturally universal phenomenon, right? And then even though this is somehow true, right? The study of conspiracy theories has become more global, particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that we still remain within certain methodologies, certain conceptualizations of conspiracy theories implied in the very concept when we use them. Now, Karen Kaplan puts this succinctly when she writes generally about the Global South, that it very often functions simply as a metaphorical margin for European oppositional strategies, an imaginary space rather than a location of theoretical production in itself. And that's kind of the beginning of this project and the beginning of also of my thinking of how would it possible maybe to maybe not invert, but also change this understanding. And I start with the work of Monika Krause, who in her 2021 book introduced the notion of model cases. The model cases are reference points that underpin broader assumptions and allow for cross-field comparisons. For her, they originate somewhere in the natural sciences, in biology, but model cases are equally effective in the social sciences as well, where they offer standardized solutions to complex issues by constructing concepts, right? And this is what we have here. And this is also why model cases are so important because they suddenly a critical side of politics and representation when it comes through discussions of representation or misrepresentation from the global south. Now think of conspiracy theory studies. What do we think of, right? JFK assassination, you know, the moon landing, 9/11, QAnon, and the many, many conspiracy theories that are now spit out, one has to say, with the Trump regime, right? And they inform mainly a field of Anglophone literary studies, of political sciences, or social psychology, which eventually has contributed to a theorization and conceptualization of what we actually mean when we speak of conspiracy theories. And these are very often particular notions of the public, particular notions of sovereignty, particular notions of the state and its institutions, right? And this very often then leads to an overemphasis of defining conspiracy theories through their relationship to liberal democracy, while often overlooking alternative forms of politics. And I think that the question for anthropologists, and also I think for many people who are interested in global dynamics, then is, are conspiracy theories really proliferating? Are they really growing? Or are we seeing something that Chakravarti and Roy described as a phenomenon where contemporary concepts attain a world historical significance and generalizability due to their increasing occurrence in Europe and in North America? Now, how can we imagine different forms of conspiracy theories and their functions? And this is where I want to take you to my main field of study, to Pakistan. Now, in November 2022, news broke of an attempted assassination of Imran Khan, the former prime minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. And even though the bullet narrowly missed him, there were a variety of stories that came up about this incident. Now, among my friends and interlocutors, both who were supporters but also opponents of Khan, it was clear everything's staged. It was just a drama, right? So some people would say the agencies, the deep state, is just causing a drama here, right? But then also people who were critical of Khan would also assume a certain drama, but in the opposite direction, right? So they would say, well, Imran Khan is just making a drama up here to get re-elected. Now, here the local concept of drama is an English word, but it's a perfectly fine concept, or the date to the word in the Urdu language. It's useful to think about different concepts of conspiracy theories. Now, within an environment that is marked by continuous precarity, by foreign interference, especially in Pakistan post 9/11, by very military interventions and so on, that seem only to benefit an oligarchical elite, the concept of drama, a staged performance designed to maintain the appearance of transparency, functions as a way in which people make sense of conspiracy theories from below, right? And this is something I took from the word of Ahmed and Akhtar, who approach conspiracy theories with Gramsci as organic conspiracy theories, those that come from below, right? The term drama was utilized by my interlocutors, I think, as a form of a heuristic, an organic conspiracy theory, or as a way to engage with circumstances that were, to quote George Marcus here, that were paranoia well within reason. And this, I think, is true, especially in Pakistan, where, as the New York Times writes in 2010, conspiracy theories have become a form of national sport. And I think that this is just one example of South Asia, of Pakistan, where we have a variety of local concepts that could work as such mode cases, right? Drama or Shadyantra, Ittifaq, local concepts that might provide a little footnote or a different perspective of what we actually mean when we speak about conspiracy theories. And I think that this is just a little addition here. And this is why I would rather speak of decentering conspiracy theories and note about a form of decolonialization, right? It's a term that has been around for quite some time and also has been fashionably used very often. But it's not about finding or opposing, so to say, a Eurocentric form of an epistemic colonial project, but it is to find the ways in which we meaningfully can compare what a conspiracy theory means and where we can't. The excesses of neoliberal capitalism, for example, or as you have seen, the logics of capitalist platforms such as YouTube, or in the future, what kind of future AI might bring. I think these are very useful useful ways in which we would be able to compare different phenomena in the global south and in the global north. But there is something else than this, if we could broadly call it Eurocentrism that we find within the discourse of conspiracy theory studies. And this is something that I would like to speak about under the idea of supercilious theory. Now, although there is an increasing recognition that conspiracy theories have become a mainstream phenomenon, much of the field of conspiracy theory studies see them as epistemic errors, as a form of wrong reasoning, and as producers of antagonism, right? Just Niels Kumquat just called it recently in one of his publications, Verständigungsunterbrecher. Breakers of communication, maybe, right? So crucial for this is the work of Karl Popper, who in The Open Society and Its Enemies, already published in 1945, speaks of conspiracy theories as a form of mistaken theory in which people want to attribute causality to the contingencies of history. And here the argument with him becomes somehow circular, because a conspiracy theory is a conspiracy theory once it's wrong, right? That's the definition of a conspiracy theory. And Popper traces this back to what he calls a pre-scientific, even tribal mindsets. Humans and societies need to find a scapegoat, right? Thunder is because Zeus is angry, for example, right? So the conspiracy theory of society is, in his opinion, the secular heir of the same impulse, right? Now it's not Zeus, it's not the gods, right? But now it's the Freemasons, the capitalists, the elders of Zion, or, the Epstein elite who is responsible for our suffering. Now, this notion of conspiracy theories as being wrong reasoning has then been increasingly psychologized with this text, which is the work of the US historian Richard Hofstadter. In 1965, the text, The Paranoid Style in American Politics, underlines the idea that there is a conspiratorial style, a set, a mindset, so to say, marked by distrust, by suspicion, and fear of perceived threats by those in powerful positions and by hidden enemies. Now, why Hofstadter is so important is because he was influential for a wide range of studies, especially in social psychology, where scholars universalized this idea of a paranoid style or a conspiratorial mentality. This then was perpetuated with a variety of quantitative researchers, very often in communication studies or in political or social sciences, with the help of questionnaires, would very often then solidify this impression that conspiracy thinking appears with distinct personalities and distinct kinds of character traits. Good example is the work of Ted Goertzel, who in 1994 argued that once conspiracy theory is accepted, then people also start to believe in more, right? So it's a gateway drug, so to say, that sucks one in. Now with Popper and the Hofstadter and their inheritors, what we basically find here is that conspiracy theories are not only constructed as a cultural phenomenon, but as a colleague of mine, Yaron Harambam, would call it, as a pathologizing discourse. And eventually, this is then what I would call in my ongoing work with the philosopher Gert van Theunen, supercilious theory making, a form of boundary drawing apparatus where one decides what counts as stigmatized knowledge and thus is also morally objectable. And interestingly here, because this also came up, I think the same could be said about other discourses about resentment. Ressentiment as a feeling, as a political or cultural feeling leading to political decisions. Discourses on populism could also be negotiated on a conceptual level, right? Where we speak about populism as a thin censored ideology, as a political logic, but then also on the level of a signifier, so a moral kind of implied moral judgment. Now, the problem with this perception with conspiracy theories then is simply certain conspiracy theories turned out to be true, right? So the weapons of mass destruction, for example, the Iran-Contra affair, but also partly, I need to say, what happened with these Epstein files. So that is one problem. What do we do when conspiracy theories turn out to be true? And then what I want to show with you as well, what I want to show to you right now is conspiracy theories tend to have different affects, different kind of effects in different kinds of host environments, notwithstanding their truth value. So they basically cannot be evaluated solely on their content. I give you another example from South Asia now. So this example should show the versatility of conspiracy theories. So this is the conspiracy theory of love jihad, and some of you might have even heard about this, right? So the conspiracy theory of love jihad has been promoted in India by the Hindu right for the last good 15 years. And the theory alleges that Muslim men conspire to convert Hindu women to Islam by luring them into marriage, ultimately aiming to alter the country's demographic makeup. Now, from the outside, as I would argue every conspiracy theory, from the outside, the love jihad conspiracy theory is a result of global encounters, which draws on various more prominent conspiracy myths, such as, for example, the Great Replacement theory. But it also then uses local anxieties. So it localizes anxieties about communal identities and eventually a form of male dominated identity politics on the body of women. And this then also led the BJP, the ruling party in power in India, to basically outlaw interfaith marriages and to legalize, or to put a certain patriarchal understanding of who should marry whom into law. Now, what is interesting for us here is that only on the other side of the border, right? In Pakistan, the concept of love jihad is also prevalent, but it's in a different form prevalent. So around the same time that love jihad gained popularity in legacy media and then increasingly on social networks, a similar narrative emerged among the religious minorities in Pakistan, where I did most of my work over the last 10, 15 years. And this story said that Muslim men were allegedly coercing non-Muslim women into converting to Islam under the trope of forced conversion. Now, while many Hindu activists in Pakistan are well aware that many of these cases of disappearing women, which are real, or at least the cases when we speak about adult women, did not involve any form of the race, any religious seal or religious coercion, but were in fact a form of women's agency where they themselves rebelled against the patriarchal system of within the minority communities, within the Hindu communities that is, they nevertheless entertained the conspiracy theory as our weapon, Hamara Hatyara, as one of my interlocutors said, right? Why? Because the Pakistani Hindu community has been overlooked for many, many decades. And now, but that's not me, it's one of my interlocutors speaking. And now suddenly there is something where the whole world basically watches this community. And so people buy into this conspiracy theory. Now, this is really, really interesting to me because it means that the mobilization of conspiracy theories about Muslim men orchestrating the forced conversion of non-Muslim women actually works as an agentive practice, somehow, strangely, weirdly, right? And through and this is not only on the streets, because through repeated activism of repeating this story, this has also contributed to a legal change, to legal developments, such as the recognition of the Hindu marriage law in 2017 on a federal level, right? So here the same conspiracy theory or conspiratorial narrative produces different kinds of affects in different kinds of host environments. To name this, and this is where I get misunderstood very often, this is not to dismiss the importance of conspiracy theory studies, nor suggest that conspiracy theories are harmless, far from it, right? It's rather to insist that there is a dominant feature within scholarly discourse approaching conspiracy theories mainly and primarily through truth claims to be evaluated, to be verified, or to be epistemically warranted. And here then it is where I think then a certain enlightened ethos or a certain kind of educational move is not successful. Because one cannot then convince people out of a conspiracy theory, right? And I want to show this by this understanding of how conspiracy theories are basically day-to-day practices. And this is the assumption that cultural anthropologists and also cultural theorists have argued for some time. Didier Fassin, for example, would speak of conspiracy theories as a social fact, which should not be approached through a pathology, for a crippled epistemology, but rather like witchcraft or like cockfighting or ritual, as social interactions which are inherent in many societies. Now, what I want to add to this is this shift from epistemology to practice. Rather than treating conspiracy theories as symptoms of cognitive failure, as beliefs to be judged true or false, or rational or even paranoid, I propose understanding them as communicative plugins whose narrative affordances become actualized under the right host conditions. And this is where we come back to our initial story, right? So Ephraim, whom you have seen here before, when he speaks of his visions, these visions of being a Jewish community are not singular. They are ongoing until today, right? And Ephraim calls these spiritual conversations in Urdu Ruhani Batein. And these Ruhani Batein are messages that he receives from Hashem, the God of Israel. And these visions keep telling him that the end of the world is near, that he and his family actually belong to the lost tribes, but have just forgotten their Jewish heritage, and that they soon will be called back to Israel, right? And now, in the many years that I spent with him and the community, it became clear that these conversations consisted of practices of continuously scouring the internet for signs confirming the community's link to the lost Jewish tribes. Now, Ephraim regularly engages in what he calls YouTube research, from which he gathers a wide range of conspiracy theories, popular eschatologies, fake news, and even satire that he then later repeats to the 300-member community, either during their weekly sermons or through the group's WhatsApp chat. Now, his authority as the group's self-proclaimed rabbi depends on linking the online plot narratives about Jews to the local life worlds of this community. And I find this quite interesting, because something similar I've seen also in the work of Tanya Luhrmann. So Ephraim's research and selection process is making these global conspiracy theories real and meta to him and to the group, right? And Tanya Luhrmann speaks about something similar in her work about Christian evangelists when she speaks about real-making practices. These are practices that people engage in when they deal with divine and invisible forces. Similarly, Ephraim engages in a variety of real-making practices to convince the community, but also potential new followers, of the reality of a large variety of plot narratives. Now, what are those? These often include ludic plots. For example, a recent one was an AI video in which Elon Musk said on the Joe Rogan podcast that Oreo cookies actually contain Masonic and satanic symbols, right? Or, for example, a satirical page from an Irishman that at one point said, "The Vatican admits that Jesus is not coming back by the looks of it," right? So all of these I followed for quite some time, but then with the 7th of October, something really interesting happened. Now, when the Hamas launched its attack on Israel, Ephraim's attention became increasingly oriented towards signs of the nearing end of the world. And these things then started to include global warming, a renewed Trump presidency, the war in Iran, obviously, but then various theories about the red heifer, apparently heralding in the beginning of the building of the third temple, and thus also the end of the world. Now, over the years following this initial epiphany, Ephraim increasingly identifies faith with notions of Jewish power. And these forms of Jewish power, interestingly, had two different kinds of sources. So the atmosphere, the environment in which this is possible had two different kinds of sources. So on the one hand, what I already spoke about, a Pakistani public sphere saturated with Judeo-phobic tropes, providing the narrative structures of a Jewish community secretly powerful, so powerful that you even need to have a law forbidding the preaching about, Jews and Illuminatis and Freemasons, which all are associated in this perspective. But then on the other hand, the online outreach of right-wing religious Zionists such as Tovia Singer and their geopolitical investment into the lost tribe narrative, and potentially also bringing them home being to Israel. Now, Ephraim and his daughters are best then described in this regard in this atmosphere as conspiracy prosumers. They, on the one hand, consume conspiracy theories, but on the other hand, by localizing, translating them, they also produce them. But interestingly, they do not appropriate simply these conspiracy theories for a specific end. They all live a quite pious Jewish life according to an Orthodox Ashkenazi tradition. Why this is, we can speak maybe about in the Q&A. So the family is living what they actually are preaching. So Ephraim's real-making practices does demonstrate how conspiracy theories possess subjectivizing and agentivizing capabilities depending on the environment they are connected to.
And this is where I want to take 2 steps back with you and maybe look at this from a more theoretical lens, what this means. I think that with Ephraim, what we see here is that conspiracy theories
are both practical tools for action and forces that shape social and political identities under the right circumstances. And this somehow, I don't know if you're going to go along with me, but this reminded me of plugins, the metaphor of plugins, right? Latour wrote about plugins that they enable various forms of agencies, but they are at the same time also subjectifiers, personalizers, and individualizers. They're not merely utilized by an actor, but they're actually actor making within a specific kind of setting. And while the relationship between agency and subjectivity is not consistent nor clear from the start, so we don't really know what kind of plugin and what result we're going to get, once conspiracy theories are plugged into a proper host environment, they may become productive. So I think that here we can look at narrative affordances, right? And I think that narrative affordances and plugins are complementary concepts that operate at 2 different levels of the same phenomenon that we're witnessing here. Narrative affordances describe what a conspiracy theory can do, potentially, what range of subject positions, identity moves, and political directions its structure makes possible, right? Also, as we have seen in its potential inversion with the idea of Jewish power. Again, a concept describes, on the other hand, how this potential gets actualized, the mechanism by which conspiracy theories integrate with a host environment, and in doing so constitutes the subject who encounters it. But there's one more thing which I find interesting here is plugins also do require this constant updating, right? The patching and the maintenance to remain compatible somehow. So when the host system changes, the plugin either gets updated or stops working somehow. And after October 7th, I think this is precisely what happened, right? The host environment shifted dramatically, the eschatological stakes intensified, and the affective charge around Israel and the Jewish identity in Pakistan changed. And Ephraim's real-making practices immediately responded. Each sermon, each WhatsApp post, each ludic plot about Oreo cookies and the Masonic symbols is in this way a form of a real-making practices for which the narrative affordances of global anti-Semitic and eschatological material are continuously tested against his community's life world. Again, also in the inversion. And in this sense, the Bnei Ephraim, I think, are not an anomaly to be explained away. Instead, they show us that conspiracy theories, when the conditions are right, do not really distort a pre-existing world, but somehow build a new one. Right, so I should come to an end here, right? Yeah. Okay, so what am I trying to say here? So I think that a global approach to conspiracy theory studies needs to decenter from US American and European model cases and look into local vernaculars, such as what I suggested with drama, that allow us to conceptualize plot narratives and conspiracy theories outside their Eurocentric understanding of public spheres, of sovereignty of state institutions, and of trust, and the trust into these state institutions. Now, this should not be thought as a dialectical exclusion from knowledge from the global north, but by establishing meaningful links where differences and same developments are possible. Now, to understand some of the challenges of our current political nexus, be that in Germany, be that in India or the United States, I argue that cultural anthropology can move us away from mere epistemological questions, interassociations with pathologies, towards a genuine interest in how conspiracy theories as practices produce whole life worlds, which are then really, really difficult to be explained away by a priestly move and enlightened ethos, right? This means that treating conspiracy theories not as an object to be judged from above as rational or irrational, but as plugins whose narrative affordances are activated differently depending on their environment. And one more thing I want to say, that's the last thing. And I think that this is the important point of when dealing with conspiracy theories. even though I criticized the scholarly authority in the beginning as an ethical theoretical decision about what counts as a conspiracy theory and what doesn't, and how to deal with this impact, this paper, and I think most of conspiracy theory studies, are not automatically exempt from this charge. I too operate on two kinds of registers. I operate on analytical argument for a practice-based approach to conspiracy theories, and there's an implicit moral defense now, right? Another inversion of marginalized communities, in this case, Pakistani Christians utilizing anti-Semitic tropes for them to be accepted as Jews, and thus not hurting anyone, so to say. Now, the focus on practices does not mean moving entirely away from content. It should not imply a cultural relativism, nor should it romanticize a marginal community's inversion of anti-Semitic tropes. Simply, Ephraim's perpetuation of anti-Semitism doesn't really abolish it, right? It reproduces it just in a different way that we might have assumed. Now, shifting from epistemology to practice does not dissolve this normative question. It simply just displaces it. And we still need to figure out and distinguish between practices that open worlds, right, and practices that close worlds. And this is a task that the present argument can only begin, but I cannot really complete. And I would not know how to do it yet. Now, finally, this paper is simply intended as a beginning of a coordinated effort to ask what an anthropological study of conspiracy theories from and in South Asia can contribute to the current dominant approaches within conspiracy theory studies, not by replacing existing frameworks, but by expanding the archive of model cases from the field, theorizing and insisting that practices of world-making in Karachi, in Delhi or Dhaka are theoretically as generative as those as in Washington, in London, and in Leipzig. Thank you so much.